How's everyone doing today? What we're going to do today is we're going to start off with the Cold War. Now that we've got World War II wrapped up, we'll jump into the Cold War. I do want to point out that very close to where I posted my Cold War lecture notes and my PowerPoint, I put a little announcement about a AP test review packet that, especially if you're taking the test, it's something you should start looking at and completing. It's going to help your review for the test. I got a lot more things coming, but we're still pretty far away from the test from what I understand. So, no sense in hitting you with that stuff now. But this is a good start for that. So, take a look at that packet, and if you can start completing it, I think it'll help you in your review for the test. So when we left off with the war, I had talked about us winning the two-front war. We had ended up the Pacific, dropping the atomic bomb, and now we're going to talk about some of the political consequences of the war and how we're going to move into a new conflict almost immediately after the end of World War II, which is known as the Cold War. Now, this conflict is primarily going to have to do with the Soviet Union versus the United States of America, or if we wanted to put it down to an ideology level, we'd say, this is communism versus democracy, which has been, coming for some time, but now, we're finally gonna really get into it here between democracy and communism. Now, one of the reasons it's referred to as a Cold War, and we'll spend some time talking about this a little bit later on, is the Soviet Union is going to get the atomic bomb, and pretty shortly after World War II, they will have an atomic bomb. 1949, they've got one. And when they have atomic bombs and we have atomic bombs, it makes conventional warfare very difficult. The good old days, you just get out in the battlefield, smack it up here, see who wins, and, United States is the best or Soviet Union is the best. But with nuclear weapons, now if there's a conflict, it could be the end of the world. We could wipe out all people. And because of that, we have to be much more careful on getting into what you might call a hot conflict or a hot war. So the Cold War is going to be about the United States and the Soviet Union trying to break each other in a very real war where there's going to be casualties and actual combat in some situations, without having to use nuclear weapons, without having to get this war hot. And there will be an eventual winner and loser to this war as well. So, in a lot of ways, it is a conventional war. But the fact that the two powers of the Soviet Union and the United States not being able to get at each other does change things and makes it a pretty unique conflict. Now, at the end of the war, we need to talk a little bit about the casualties, because this will impact how different countries look at how Europe should be after the war. So if we look at the Soviet Union here, military deaths are 11 million, civilian deaths are, maybe close to 7 million. These are pretty low numbers. I've heard with the Soviet Union, if we bring in, the Stalin regime and what he did and the war itself, those years from maybe 35 to 45, we're looking at maybe 40 million is what is some of the numbers I've heard. So about 40 million for the Soviet Union. Germany, we're looking at, close to 6 million casualties. This number for China is absurd. It's 1,400,000 deaths, 8 million civilian deaths. Most historians that I've talked to and that I've read would tell you that this number's way higher than this. 20 million probably on the civilian side, easy for China. Poland gets hit pretty hard. The military deaths are not high, but look at those civilian deaths, 5,300,000. So the Polish get hit pretty hard. Again, hate to lose any American lives, but 405,000, 2,000 civilian deaths. The war is pretty much not going to be fought here. So again, our cost is pretty low. England's at 300,000 military deaths. France is very low. They're knocked out there pretty quickly. Italy's pretty low there. But, the Soviet Union, China, Germany, Japan, they take some pretty big hits here. I might have forgot to go through Japan there, but they're almost 2 million casualties. Now, I like this chart here because it shows us the military deaths in World War I compared to the military deaths in World War II. So You look at it in World War I, civilian death is pretty small, 14%. However, in World War II, look at the civilian death, 54%. So World War II is a much nastier war. And it's probably because you're dealing with Stalin, Hitler, Tojo, you're dealing with these tyrannical leaders, which, brings your death toll up. Now, after this conflict, Americans are happy that the war is over, and we're looking to get home as fast as we can. We want the boys back home, having a cheeseburger, drinking a Coke, and making out with their girlfriend. So we're trying to get the boys back. And our guys are looking forward to getting home as fast as possible. And in fact, one of the reasons we're going to have the baby boom, all right, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, is American soldiers are very happy to be home. And there's a lot of happy time going on. So we're trying to get our guys back. Here's an American soldier kissing his wife or girlfriend, hopefully. Now the problem is where we're in kind of this euphoric mood, to try to get our soldiers back, or, restructure how the world's going to be, go on with our lives. We're beginning to notice that the Soviet Union is not going home. They're not pulling out of Eastern Europe. They're not pulling out of Germany. So where we're starting to move our boys out, the Soviet Union appears as if they're not going anywhere. That they're just looking to take Eastern Europe as just communist territory. Now, we do not like this, so we're going to leave soldiers in Germany and we're going to leave soldiers in Berlin. And, one could say we're going to threaten Stalin, and we tell him, listen, Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, Serbia, Hungary, this is not just going to be like the Soviet Union now. That's not how this is going to play out. We need you to pull out of there. Now, Stalin's balking a little bit, he's saying, listen, everyone doesn't want democracy, and, some people want communism, and, you need to give us a fair shake. And Truman suggests that if, the Soviets intend to just keep this land, then things might need to get nuclear. This is 1945, so we've got the bomb, they don't, and, we tell them basically hey, hate to have to nuke Moscow, but we do it. Now, Stalin is going to, at this point, ask that these countries be able to hold free elections and choose freely if they want democracy or communism. We say, okay, we'll let them pick. Pretty certain that we know what the outcome is going to be. So these countries are allowed to have free elections, and in these elections, surprise, surprise, in every single one of these Eastern European countries, they choose a communist to lead their country. Now, we're fairly positive we know what happened here. These elections were rigged. And the Soviets just stuffed the ballot box, and a lot of these countries, probably all of them, to be honest with you, selected democracy, and now they're democratically elected a communist government, and all of these little countries here will be communist nations. Now, they're technically independent, so you'll see this isn't going to say Soviet Union there. You've got all these different countries, but they're called Soviet satellites. And if you look at your note sheet there, I got satellites for you. And these are countries that are technically independent from the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union is the puppet master, and it's telling all these countries what to do, and they don't have a choice. One of these countries, we'll talk about this later, you can't just be like, you know what, we're not going to be communist anymore. No, that's not how it works. So the Soviet Union is gonna lock these countries down. And then what's going to happen is the Soviet Union is going to create what is sometimes known as the Soviet bloc, where if you are in these countries in the pink here, there's no leaving. As soon as these people find out that they're in communist states, a lot of, sometimes called the brain drain, where a lot of the scientists and doctors and intellectuals are like, well, I'm out of here. And they're trying to get to airports and they're trying to get out of there, and the Soviet Union's like, no, you are not leaving. you're locked in. Anyone that wants to come to these countries, oh, absolutely. If you want to visit Grandma in Romania, happy to have you. Good luck getting home. Good luck with that. But if you want to go see Grandma in Romania, oh yeah, you're good to go. So they lock this down, and it becomes what's sometimes referred to as the Soviet bloc, where these countries are just controlled and manipulated by the Soviet Union. Now, when this happens, the United States is not going to be really pleased with this situation, and we totally know we got burned on it. But the real problem is, what are you going to do? Are you going to nuke Moscow? Well, we ain't really looking to do that, all right? We've already been the only country to drop an atomic bomb. We've dropped 2 of them. We're taking enough heat for that. And then secondly, the United States doesn't want to be the country that's just nuking everyone that we don't agree with. That's not who we want to be. So certainly we're at an impasse here with the Soviet Union, because we can't nuke them, and we're not going to bring the boys back from coming home and, hey, we got a new war to fight against the commies. We're not doing that either. So what's going to happen is we have this very real separation between Eastern and Western Europe, where Eastern Europe is going to be communist primarily, and Western Europe is going to be democracy primarily. And the dividing line between Eastern and Western Europe is sometimes going to be referred to as the Iron Curtain. There is no real Iron Curtain, okay, but there is a real dividing line there that you cannot cross, especially on the communist end. This is a great cartoon where Winston Churchill is looking under, the Iron Curtain, and it says, "No admittance by order of Joe," and Joe certainly is Joe Stalin, and he's kind of checking to see what's going on in there. I'm not sure if you can see this, but one thing I've always liked about this cartoon is, you see the guard on the wall. The gun's not pointing out. The gun's pointing in. This is a prison. This isn't something that people are trying to get into. This is something that people are trying to get out of. So keep that in mind. It's kind of an interesting cartoon there. Winston Churchill is the guy who coins the phrase Iron Curtain. He's actually given a speech at an American university. I can't remember the university off the top of my head, but he says, "I feel as if an Iron Curtain has descended over Eastern Europe," and that's where that term comes from. Here's a great little picture of Stalin trying to claim all his land in Eastern Europe. Will he take Western Germany? Will he get France? What's going to happen next? Now, this brings us to the American reaction to this. We're very concerned about the spread of communism, not only the forceful spread of Joseph Stalin and his trickery, but we're also concerned about the fact that communism appeals to poor people. And World War II it leaves a war-ravaged Asia and Europe that is devastated and experiencing massive poverty. And these conditions are ripe for communism. So we're very concerned about the spread of communism overall, and we're going to enact a policy referred to as containment. We're going to put the lid on communism. We're not going to let it spread any further. Make sure you highlight that in your notes there, containment. Our first real act in this containment action is going to be what's known as the Truman Doctrine. And, take a look at that in your notes as well. The Truman Doctrine is going to state that any country in the world that is threatened by communism, all you have to do is ask for American help, and we're there for you. We're there for you with money. We could be there for you in military aid, but, we're going to do what we can to help you out. Now, initially, there wasn't supposed to be any limitations to this. Now, as we go on in this class, we'll talk about how the Truman Doctrine, we decide to enforce it in other places and decide to ignore it in other places, So we don't use it all the time. We pick and choose when we want to use it, but it is designed to stop the spread of communism. And in fact, one could say the Truman Doctrine is one of the key things that leads us into the Vietnam War. So it will have some pretty profound effects. Now, when the Truman Doctrine is enacted, Joseph Stalin is going to test us out pretty quickly in two areas. One is Yugoslavia, and the other is Greece. Their communist revolutions begin in both countries, and we're just writing blank checks to both Yugoslavia and Greece, to help them fight off these communist revolutions. Although we do try to help Yugoslavia, we will fail there in the end. They'll develop a dictatorship under a guy named Tito that we'll talk about. But in Greece, we are going to be successful. We throw a lot of money into Greece, and one of the big reasons why is you can't have Greece go down to communism. I mean, you can't have a hammer and sickle hanging over the Parthenon. I mean, this is where democracy was born. Like, we can't lose Greece, and we do not lose Greece. So between the two, Greece was the real focal point there, and we are able to save Greece. Now, when the Truman Doctrine is put into effect, this is certainly a slap into Stalin's face, and I love this one, like, put that in your pipe and smoke it, Stalin. And he certainly doesn't like the taste of it. However, people, certainly within the American government, believe that the Truman Doctrine was a reactionary document. So, like, when communism rears its ugly head, we jump in. And a lot of people felt like, why are the commies making the first move? Maybe we should make the first move. Why are we always reacting? So there is a thought to introduce what's going to be known as the Marshall Plan. And it's going to be proposed by our Secretary of State. This guy right here, his name is George C. Marshall. And what Marshall proposes is economic aid to Europe. Now, the thought was that if Europe was economically destroyed and was ripe for communism, if we were to go in and just give these countries money to rebuild themselves, that communism wouldn't start there because people would have good lives, and we would prevent communism in this whole area. Now, we offer money to all the countries in the gray that you're seeing there, and also all the countries in the white, the communist countries. The Soviet Union will not let them accept our money, but we do offer it to all of these countries, and Japan, which actually got the biggest chunk of change, and there's a lot of nuclear guilt there, but we did give the Japanese a lot of money in this program as well. They're just not on my map. Now, if you can see up there, you see these stacks of dollar signs, okay, and that one little stack right there, so maybe about that much right there, is about $400 million. So you see how high these stacks go, and about that right there is about $400 million, and you can just see how much money we are pumping into these countries. Now, these are not loans, okay? These are financial gifts that we're giving to these countries to help them rebound from the impact of World War II. Also, not only are we going to spend money, but we're going to send a lot of American companies over there, GM, Ford, General Electric, help these countries retool. It does not play out well for us. For instance, General Electric goes into Japan and revamps their electronic industry, and the Japanese are crushing us today. I mean, just to give you one stat, we are the country that invented the television. You cannot buy an American-made television today. It is not possible to do it. All right. Now, is it all the Marshall Plan? No, absolutely not. The Japanese are innovative, and they make better TVs and cheaper TVs, and that's why we have a lot of Japanese TVs. However, to say that it's had no impact on that is ridiculous. It had a significant impact on it. Same thing if you look at the automotive industry. I mean, at one time it was Lincolns and Cadillacs were the luxury cars. Boy, if you had a Lincoln or a Cadillac, you were balling. Now it's BMW, Mercedes. Those are German cars. So it's not just the actual cash handout. It's also what we do business-wise. Now, the thing is, this is really the beginning of our national debt here, the Marshall Plan. It's certainly not all the national debt. We add on to that ourselves a lot. But it's the beginning. The Marshall Plan is a very controversial plan because it actually does work. None of these countries that you're seeing here that receive financial aid, except for Yugoslavia down there, will become communist. That will not happen. However, the real question is, how many of these countries would have become communist? Like, is France really going commie? Is England really going commie? Like, did we have to give England $1 billion? You know, was that really necessary? That's the debate, you know. But overall, the plan is successful. It just really matters on whether or not you think the plan's worth it or not. Is the debate with the Marshall Plan. Here's a cartoon that came out, because even at the time, Americans were upset about how much money we're given, you know. And here is a European on a bicycle, you know, it says the Marshall Plan, and here's the American taxpayer, and he's like, keep pumping, you can do it, you can pedal yourself, you know, so we don't have to pay for them anymore. Now, when the Marshall Plan comes into play, you know, I mean, it's a deliberate slap in the face of Joseph Stalin. I mean, you know, we're hitting him with the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan. You know, we're doing a lot of state-sponsored programs that are directly targeted against communism and Stalin. So he's going to have to do something. And, you know, I love this one, too. You know, here's the Marshall Plan coming in, European recovery. Can he block it? He is going to try to block it, or at least try to react to it. And where he's going to react is Berlin. Now, in the last lecture that I did, I talked about how at the end of the war, Germany's going to be broken up into different sections, all right? So we have like American, British, French section here. That's going to become West Germany. That's going to be a democracy. The Soviet section over here is going to be Eastern Germany, and that's going to be communist. Now, Berlin is the oddball, okay? Berlin sits in Eastern Germany, but half of Berlin, Western Berlin, we did not take our soldiers out of. So you have a little pocket of democracy sitting in Eastern Germany. Now, the reason that's important is, you know, Western Germany is really about being like rebuilt. You know, we super happy with the Germans. No, we're not. Okay, but this is a lot of like restructuring, rebuilding, not a ton of punishment. The Germans have got their own. I mean, their population's been decimated. Their cities are destroyed. I mean, they have enough to do. Eastern Germany is about punishment. So the Soviets want to make the lives of the Eastern German people as horrible as they possibly could make them. Now, you know, the reason I showed you that casualty thing in the beginning is we can say, oh, you know, the Russians, you know, they're so mean, why would they do this to the German people? Well, your reaction to the German people is going to be different when you lost maybe 300,000 and when you've lost 27 million. So, you know, I read you know, it'd be nice if they were more compassionate here in East Germany, but it's not like the Soviet Union has no ground to stand on here. You know, I mean, they've got some ground to stand on, and they're looking to punish them. So the reason I point this out is Western Berlin is becoming an escape hatch. If you can get to Western Berlin and get in there, then we can fly you out of there. You know, we can send you to Disney World or wherever we can get you. And this is how Berlin is divided up. So Soviet side, French, British zone, American zone. And if you can get into these zones, you can get out. And you can see the different airports there. Now, Stalin understands this better than anyone. So what he's going to do is he is going to shut down the borders around Western Berlin. Now, eventually, this will become the very famous Berlin Wall. Now, we are not there yet, okay? But eventually that will be the case. Now what we're looking at is tanks, machine guns, barbed wire fencing, you know, just no one in, no one out. He just shuts it down. And he can technically do that because all of the land around Western Berlin is communist land. So he's not actually going into our territory. He's just not allowing anyone in. And the thought was to stop the brain drain, to stop people from getting out of communism, and then also that so little food would get in here that the people living in Western Berlin, specifically our soldiers, would have to evacuate, and everything would become Stalin's. There would be no Western presence in Berlin. Now we had to think about what we wanted to do here. And the idea, because we can't get any trucks through here, was to fly airplanes over Eastern Germany, drop off supplies in Berlin, and then, keep that going for day after day after day, and just resupply this area through air support. And we're going to be getting thousands of tons of cargo up there each day and just flying them into Berlin. Sometimes we would land the plane, sometimes we would just drop off cargo. Here's a plane that's going to be dropping off some supplies in Eastern Berlin, which was technically illegal, but these Eastern Berlin people, they don't have any medical supplies. So, we would fly planes in, drop off humanitarian aid for them. Also a little bit of American propaganda, some bumper stickers, some Uncle Sam dolls, why not? So we're not only supplying Western Berlin, but a little bit of Eastern Berlin as well. And this keeps Berlin going. Now, there's two ways that Stalin can stop this. Number one is he could shoot an American plane down. Now, once again, we have got the atomic bomb here. Joseph Stalin does not. And shooting down an American plane is too aggressive for him. He will not do that. He's concerned about what the outcome of that may be. So he will not push it that far. The other thing is he goes to the UN. And he says, listen, the Americans are dropping supplies in Eastern Berlin, which is illegal. We want to cease and desist. We get brought in. They're like, United States, have you been doing this? We go, well, maybe some cargo's falling into Eastern Berlin, but that wouldn't happen if Stalin would just open up the gates and allow, some trucks in there. We wouldn't have any of these problems. And the UN goes, Stalin, you could open up some gates and let some food in there. Stalin goes, okay, but I'm checking everything. And then they go, United States, you gotta stop dropping stuff in Eastern Berlin. We go, okay. So it's like two little children. It's like conflict resolution here. Agreements are made, checkpoints are set up. This is a point right here called Checkpoint Charlie. And what would happen is your car would go through there. They would check to see if you're smuggling people or anything like that. And then you could go into Western Berlin. Now, as ridiculous as this sounds, okay, people are getting smuggled. One of the most famous things that we used was, if like a big rig truck on the sides, they've got those big, I think they hold gas, those big gas tanks on the side. And democracies would put people in those with air holes. And then they would come up to the checkpoint, they would check in the truck, check the back of the truck, but they wouldn't check in those areas. And then you'd slide through and then, you'd be free. So these checkpoints were used. When I was a little kid, I was in Western Berlin, and I had a grandmother that lived there, great-grandmother that lived there. And we went to Checkpoint Charlie. I saw it. I didn't go through it. But I will say one thing that was really interesting to me as a little kid is I had never seen tanks or machine guns or anything before, and they're just everywhere, just moving around, I remember that had a lasting effect on me. After this conflict with Berlin, we are going to create an organization called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And the mission of NATO is to stop the spread of communism. So I need you to make sure that you know that NATO is to stop the spread of communism. NATO is going to consist of most of the countries in Western Europe. The Soviet Union will quickly counter with their version. This is called the Warsaw Pact. And this will have to do with countries that are communist, mainly countries in Eastern Europe. There's the Warsaw Pact. And this is about how it would play out. What you see here in the yellow is NATO. What you see here in the pink is the Warsaw Pact. And, the Warsaw Pact is going to try to stop the spread of democracy. Now, today, we could look at this as, like-minded peoples coming together for, common interest. However, at the time, people looked at this and thought alliance systems. This is what happened before World War I, this is what happened with World War II, sides are being drawn, here comes our next big war. And what makes this war even scarier is in 1949, the Soviet Union are going to detonate an atomic bomb. And this is actually the photo of their atomic bomb detonating in Siberia. This was very shocking to us. Our scientists had told our government that we had at least a decade before the Soviet Union had an atomic bomb. So when they detonated one in 1949, just 4 years after we detonated one, all our leverage is gone. You know, I mean, we've been using that atomic bomb to try to get some things done. Maybe not as heavy-handed as we maybe should have used the atomic bomb, but you know, now that leverage is over. Now our enemy has got the atomic bomb as well. Now, what might even be a bigger problem here is, you know, how they got the atomic bomb, because we know that their science ain't there. So at that point, the only way they could have the atomic bomb is they stole it from us, which they did. The Soviet Union had 2 spies, a husband and a wife couple, operating within our CIA. They stole our atomic bomb technology. They gave it to the Soviet Union, and we eventually caught both of them for doing this. Now, this does not happen a lot in our country, but both are put on trial for treason, you know, and treason is when you do something to deliberately sabotage the security of your country. And taking our atomic bomb and giving it to our arch enemy is pretty much the definition of that. So they're both sentenced to death. Now, the real issue with this was not so much the guy, no one cared about that, but the wife. They had 2 kids. One was 13 years old boy, I think it was like a 12 or 11-year-old girl or something like that, and then that got real, boy, because they had the kids on TV, like, please don't kill my mom, you know, and, you know, people are protesting outside the Capitol building, and, you know, it got very, very heated. However, you know, Eisenhower, who's the president at this time, he's the president after Truman, decides, you know, if we let this woman go, then the Russians are just going to use female spies, because they know we won't execute them. So he says, nope, she's got to die too. And we did kill both of them. It was a pretty controversial moment. Now, tomorrow we'll get into the nuclear age. We'll talk about some thermonuclear weapons, the difference, and we'll get this Cold War heated up. We'll get into the space race a little bit and some interesting stuff. So hopefully you enjoyed today's lesson, and we'll pick it up tomorrow. Thanks.